Manufacturing Matters is an MFG Radio Network production brought to you by GIE Media's Manufacturing Group as industry experts take deep dives into the latest manufacturing matters, whether it's new innovations, products, technologies, and emerging markets that help you understand better why manufacturing matters to you and also to the top companies in the medical, aerospace, defense, and electric vehicle manufacturing industries. Hello and welcome to our latest discussion from GIE Media's Manufacturing Group, the ins and outs of CMMC 2.0. I'm Jake Kaufman, the managing editor for our Aerospace Manufacturing and Design, Today's Medical Developments, and Defense and Munitions magazines, along with EV Design and Manufacturing, our online publication. Today, we hope you'll learn about the upcoming requirements of the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification, also known as CMMC 2.0. We'd like to thank today's sponsor, Smithers Information Security Services. Smithers Information Security Services, a part of Smithers Quality Assessments, offers assessments against the ISO 27001 and the NIST SP 800-171 standards. Smithers will serve as a CMMC third-party assessor organization once CMMC 2.0 is finalized. We also would like to thank our series sponsors, Amphenol CIT and Renishaw. Amphenol CIT, formerly known as Carlisle Interconnect Technologies, is a global leader in designing and manufacturing high-performance wire and cable, including optical fiber. With more than 80 years of experience, the company offers a comprehensive product portfolio featuring specialty and filtered connectors, contacts, integrated systems, cable assemblies, and complex harnesses, along with racks, avionics, trays, and installation kits. Now part of Amphenol, the company is more committed than ever to excellence, providing top-tier, lightweight, and durable products for the harshest environments. Additionally, they offer engineering and certification services for commercial aerospace, military, industrial, test and measurement, and space industries. Visit www.amphenol-cit.com for more information. And Renishaw, from the core of our business to the heart of your manufacturing, our precision manufacturing solutions are helping manufacturers around the world tackle new production challenges. These include the increased demand for innovative new products for more complex parts, higher design specifications, and shorter product life cycles. For more than 50 years, industrial metrology has been at the core of Renishaw's business. As precision manufacturers ourselves, we've developed robust process control solutions that give our customers confidence that their parts will meet design intent and their manufacturing processes perform as required. Process control solutions increase the levels of automation which are possible in manufacturing, reducing dependency on skilled operators, and to maintain the quality of production parts. The ability to create parts with tightly toleranced features is vital in many industries for the performance, aesthetics, and safety of finished products. Our industrial metrology systems and sensors capture the data required to identify and control sources of variation, enabling increased throughput with reduced rework, concessions, and scrap. Remember that innovation matters. To read more about our technologies and their real-world applications, you can download the latest issue of Innovation Matters magazine, which is available right now in the chat. And today's presenter is Robert McVeigh. He joined Smithers in 2021 as a senior consultant for information security services in Smithers Quality Assessments division. Prior to Smithers, he was a founding partner for the cybersecurity and strategy consulting firm Optimus Partners, LLC. He served at all levels within the U.S. Army and was a successful project manager for two multi-billion-dollar programs. He was the first Chief Information Security Officer and Deputy Chief Information Officer for Cyberspace Management and Integration at the U.S. Missile Defense Agency. You may also recognize him as our cybersecurity columnist for Defense and Munitions magazine. But without any further ado, Robert McVeigh, the floor is yours.
Right. Thank you, Jake. I appreciate it. And welcome, everybody. I'm going to give you about a 30-minute rundown on cybersecurity, the maturity model certification, or CMMC 2.0. This is at the leader level. This is not a technical implementation. We're not going to get into the 110 controls. We're going to actually talk to you as a manager, as a leader in an organization, what it takes to actually be CMMC compliant and why you want to start that journey as quickly as possible. First and foremost, Smithers is an ANA-based certification body, and as such, all training that we provide is purely provided as guidance, and there is no warranty or guarantee that any of the information presented here is applicable to any audit, current, future, or past, that may be conducted by Smithers or any other ANA-B certification body. Nor do we do this with the approval or the consideration to the U.S. government and Department of Defense. This is our interpretation and understanding of the CMMC rules as they are flowing out. Real quick, our agenda, we're going to talk a little bit about what is CMMC, why it is implemented, who must comply, and some tidbits on how to implement CMMC. It sounds daunting when you open the manuals and you start looking at the 110 controls, 320 objective assessment statements, etc. You start getting into it. It looks very complicated. It's actually not as complicated as it looks. But let's jump right into it. Why do the CMMC goals exist? Well, essentially what was happening was the Department of Defense was watching a lot of unclassified but sensitive information be stolen. And so as a result, the Department of Defense put in a safeguard to basically say this information, while it's not classified, we still don't necessarily want exposed to our adversaries out there. We're also trying to protect the defense industrial base. A lot of their intellectual property goes into making the systems and the computers and the software and the hardware, et cetera, used by the Department of Defense. The other piece is making sure that there's accountability. Who is actually minding, the warriors to make sure that the data is protected? And we wanted to, in doing so, the Department of Defense wanted to make sure that there was still collaboration, that there was still the ability to exchange information, that the cybersecurity didn't get so strong that it basically prevented collaboration. And then foremost and most importantly, because the Department of Defense is funded by taxpayer dollars, they wanted to maintain the public's trust that there was a level of professionalism and ethical standards behind cybersecurity. So that's the high-level goals with where CMMC started. If you have any questions about the content in today's presentation, I always do this. I teach a lot as well. One of the things I always put is my source referencing. It's at the bottom of each slide. More importantly, at the end of the briefing, there'll actually be an entire page that has every reference used to build this information. So you can actually go look at the information yourself and make your own interpretation. So what is the cybersecurity model certification? Well, it started out with a 1.0, had 5 levels. And then in 2021, the Department of Defense pumped the brakes, said, we're going to have a 2.0. And CMMC 2.0, they decided was going to be built completely on the National Institute for Standards and Technologies Special Publication 800-171, or essentially protecting controlled unclassified information in non-federal systems and organizations. It's really important to focus on the fact that it says non-federal systems. So this is how contractors who are operating their own systems in support of the government, not the contractor operating a system for the government. So this is their own internal systems. The CMMC NIST 800-171 came up with a minimum set of controls that are basically designed to make sure that everybody is generally protecting the information to the same level, same standard. As you can see here, there are 3 different levels here. Level 1 is the foundational, what they also call, on all likelihood, federal contract information, FCI. You might hear that terminology. The level 2 is basically where they're thinking the bulk of all the Department of Defense contractors, about 70,000 of them, maybe as high as 90, but about 70,000 contractors are expected to be in this zone. The level 3 is basically level 2 companies that are held to a slightly higher standard. And right now that's about 32 additional controls that the government actually comes in and inspects rather than a third party. One of the key things that we have to keep in mind about the CMMC is that the CMMC is only focused on protecting the confidentiality of the Department of Defense and its information. So if you want to try and extend the CMMC standard to the totality of your organization, that's usually a good idea. However, understand that because it is focused on protecting the DoD's controlled unclassified information, certain things like levels of resiliency, business continuity, et cetera, are not as critical to the CMMC model as they would if you're doing, say, an ISO 27001 or a CIS, where you're trying to protect the entire organization. What is CUI, or controlled unclassified information? Short answer, it's information that the Department of Defense has chosen not to raise to the level of classified, confidential, secret, top secret, et cetera, but that information does not necessarily need to be out in the wild or exposed to the internet or anybody having access to it. The gobbledygook, I know I get in trouble for saying that, but the terminology that National Archives uses for it is, it's safeguarding dissemination controls pursuant to law, government-wide policies. That's kind of fuzzy. What it basically boils down to is it's information about government products, about government systems, hardware, et cetera, that there's something about it that makes it just unique enough to be Department of Defense that they don't necessarily want that out for anybody to be able to replicate or to steal. If you look at some of the arguments that occurred early on with CMMC, you took a picture of the U.S. military's F-35, the Joint Strike Fighter, and then you looked at the Chinese version of the similar fighter, you could see very quickly that those were very, very similar in design. So much so that in many cases we're confident that the information was stolen. There is a thing called for official use only, FOUO, that many of us that operate in the defense sector for years are used to seeing. FOUO is an old term. It's been legacied out. Now the proper term is CUI. And part of it is that there is still FOUO out there. Much of the FOUO that is out there can be CUI, but you don't automatically assume that FOUO is CUI. Different rules for FOUO and CUI. So if you have a whole bunch of FOUO documents and you're concerned about it, probably need to go back to your contracting officer or government program officer and say, okay, what of this FOUO is CUI and what is still FOUO, and we can disregard in some respects. This is a very important one here at the bottom. CUI is not considered classified information. It's got to be protected, but it's protected very differently than we do classified information. So oftentimes you'll hear people comment about, this is CUI classified. No, there's no such thing as CUI classified. CUI means exactly that. It's unclassified and should be treated as such. A little further on, I told you what NARA says, or the National Archives, NARA is the acronym for them, what they determine to be CUI. The Department of Defense has 5 categories of what they call CUI. Most of us will probably be dealing in controlled technical information. If you are in critical sectors like water, power management, power plants, et cetera, you might be handling critical infrastructure. Most organizations will probably not be handling naval nuclear propulsion, and most of that, luckily for us, is classified, as well as the unclassified, nuclear information. Again, positive is most of that's classified, and privileged security information. These are the 5 categories. If your company deals in ITAR, please be mindful. ITAR is a form of CUI, but ITAR is under the Department of State and Export Control. It is not under the Department of Defense. So you could very much have an organization that has CUI, that is DoD, controlled technical information, and ITAR information, which is restricted, for export around the globe. And the interesting piece there is that you can actually have DoD CUI, like controlled technical information, that is also ITAR. So kind of have to work through the nuances of that for an organization. I could go spend an hour trying to detail the differences. Highly recommend that if you're in this sector where you have CUI and ITAR, you probably need to talk to your ITAR assessor as well as your CUI assessor to determine how you parse those out and make sure that your assessments are done properly.
Robert, we had a question about that slide.
Okay.
Are NIN considered CUI?
NIN. Help me with what NIN means. I don't want to get myself in trouble for an acronym.
Yeah, it looks like Jason in the audience was wondering. So Jason, if you are still listening, if you could kind of tell us what NIN stands for, just so we get the correct acronyms, then Robert will be able to answer for you. National Identification Number. Is your National Identification Number considered CUI?
Your National Identification Number is considered PII, which is a subcategory of CUI. So yes, it is.
Awesome. Thank you, Robert.
But it's CUI in the broader. There are 37 categories of CUI on the NARA webpage. So I'll go back here. If you have any questions about what they are, whoa, I'm going way too fast in the wrong direction. Here we go. If you have any questions about what CUI is, this one right here, https://archives.gov, CUI and about. Great site. It'll show you the 37 types of CUI. A national identification number would fall under personal identifiable information, which is a type of CUI, but is not under the Department of Defense for the Department of Defense forms of CUI. Hope that answers the question for you. Because this is a U.S. government system, we all know that law, policies, and regulations are in play. So I go from the highest. The law is Code of Federal Regulations, Part 48. Basically requires the basic safeguarding of covered contractor information. Got it. In 2010, there was an executive order issued that reinforced the use of controlled unclassified information and how to protect it. Ultimately, the Code of Federal Regulations, Part 32, is currently being updated, and this is the real meat. This is the teeth behind the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification 2.0. That's the rule that we're all waiting for and pending release here in the next couple of months. And this was what will really bring home the requirement. There's always been a requirement to do cybersecurity in your organization, but this rule in Part 32 of the CFR is what mandates the use of third-party assessors and mandates the requirement that you have to have a third-party assessment before you're allowed to compete for government contracts. I also list the Defense Federal Acquisition Regulation Supplement, DFARS. These are the 5 clauses that will trigger most organizations to realize that you're handling CUI. You're playing in this space of CUI, and therefore you've got to comply with the requirements. Most of us will probably in our contract see something like 252, 204, 7012, safeguarding covered defense information and cyber incident reporting. If you have none of the other clauses, but you do have this one, by default, you probably are handling CUI and need to have a conversation with your contracting officer or government program manager to determine what other requirements are typically there. What we most of the time see in government contracts that are being released and RFPs that are going out on the street is 7012, 7019, 7020, and 7024 are all in your contracts. They're clauses of the contract. The 7021 may or may not be in your contract because the 7021 clause is waiting for this Code of Federal Regulations, CFR, Part 17032 to be released. Once this becomes released and they update the CFR, then the 7021 will start appearing in every contract that goes out. And a little further on in the briefing, we actually have a timing that you can probably expect to start seeing these requirements. The interesting piece is the requirement for 7012 has probably been in every one of your contracts that you've received since 1 January of 2018. Now, how do you know if you have CUI in your contract? Simplest is, like I just said before, look for any one of the 4 clauses or 5 clauses. 21, like I said, may or may not be there. But if you have 7012, 7019, 7020, or 7024, you are likely handling CUI. By default, even if these clauses are not there, but the government or your contractor, if you're a subcontractor, sends you data marked controlled unclassified information, CUI. You are now in possession of CUI. You probably need to have a very quick conversation with your contracting officer and program manager because you have now been, by extension and, in my opinion, contamination, you've been brought into the CUI world. Now, there are ways to remediate that and take that back out. But if they're handing you controlled unclassified information, you probably are doing it. The other piece about it is even if you have all these clauses, but you don't see any CUI in the program, you can always ask the government for a copy of the program Security Classification Guide, or SCG, because if the Security Classification Guide states that there is CUI, it'll explain how it is created, what it is, and how it's to be handled. That's a positive, so that can help you out right there. We tell every contractor that comes to us, says, we found the clauses, but we don't have any CUI, we don't have anything marked. Are we actually handling CUI? Well, the shortest and simplest answer is go back to your contracting officer, whether it's the government contracting officer or your customer contracting officer, whoever flowed the requirements to you. Go back to the contracting officer or the PM and ask that you want a statement about whether or not the program and the contract is handling CUI. And more importantly, you need that in writing. So if the contracting officer says, we just do those as standard clauses, but no, you're not handling CUI, you want the contracting officer to put that in writing, because if they don't put that in writing, by default, because you have this 7012 clause, you are now subject to the requirement for a CMMC third-party assessment. So you want it in writing if the contracting officer says no. If the contracting officer says, I don't know, you kind of want to pursue it, but you probably are handling CUI at that point, and probably should just plan on having to deal with it. We talked real briefly about this. Why CMMC, the theft of intellectual property?
Robert, sorry to interrupt you again.
for it.
Jason came back with kind of a follow-up question.
Okay.
He asks, NINs are DLA solicitations call out NIN. They're all over the internet. Many sites will decode the NIN to supplier part numbers that are not correct connections or adaptations. Is CMMC supposed to correct or fix issues like that?
Okay, then I think I have a confusion here. When you're referring to NIN, you're referring to an identification number of a part or an item, not a person's national ID number. Is that correct?
Yes, I believe so there, Robert.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. No, NINs, NINs then are not CUI. NINs are how the Department of Defense and many contracting systems handle and exchange information so that we make sure we are actually talking about the same part. I'm sorry, I thought you were talking about a personal national identification number, which is typically like a Canadian ID or a UK or European or a social security number here in the United States. My apologies for the confusion. But if you're referring to a Department of Defense product or an item for the Department of Defense or the US government, and you're talking to the national identification number for it, no, that is not classified. I'm confused the two for you. Does that address your question, Jason?
Looks like you did answer it there. So thank you,
Okay.
Robert.
Yeah, my apologies for making the confusion on that one, folks. Okay, back to why CMMC is important. The big thing here is the potential to impact to national security. And if you aggregate enough unclassified information, you can start to make some assumptions or inferences about the classified components of a platform based upon enough unclassified information. The Department of Defense issued back in 2016 a memorandum and a requirement. That's that 7012 clause 252 204 7012. That clause actually went into effect on the 1st of January 2018, stating that all contractors handling government information and CUI had to do a self-attestation against the NIST Special Publication 171, and they had to report a SPURS score. That's a supplier risk system that they had to enter their score. The problem is that went into effect on 1 January 2018, and compliance was suspect, and there was inconsistency as to how contractors were assessing themselves, which then precipitated the fact that the government in 2019 decided, okay, we cannot rely on all these companies to self-attest because there's too much variation, there's too much interpretation. And so what they started was the CMMC program in 2019 that had the goal of being fully implemented by 2014. Unfortunately, the Department of Defense had to pause and pump the brakes a little bit back in 2021 because the rulemaking left too many questions to be answered. So as a result, in November 5th of 2021, the Department of Defense withdrew the CMMC 1.0, issued interim guidance on CMMC 2.0, and then for the last 3 years, we have been with the government working out what the rule is. The rule is much more comprehensive and more complete, and we're anticipating it to be released this year. I'll get this question on a regular basis. Who must comply with CMMC? The short answer is that if you're a DoD contractor or subcontractor, you must comply with CMMC. Different levels of compliance, not just about every contractor who's not handling information deemed CUI will be considered a level 1, and you'll do what's called federal contract information, meaning you have 17 controls that basically says you're safeguarding the fact that you have a government contract, the value of the contract, the deliverables, and what is in that contract. That'll be clearly articulated in your contract. There won't be any confusion if you're a level 1 requirement for a contractor, but you still have some component of CMMC, not the 110, but like I said, 17 practices. If you're a contractor that is actually managing critical information that is designated as CUI, you are considered a CMMC level 2, and you require a third-party assessment. We'll talk about those in a few minutes. And then above that, there are programs that are deemed most critical defense information, and so as a result, they're level 3. Short answer is level 3 is all the requirements of level 2 with about 32 or 37 additional safeguards and checks that the government inspects over and above it. Any contractor who is required, who has CMMC and needs to flow down CMMC to a subcontractor by regulation, the DFAR 7012, is required to flow that CMMC requirement in full context down to any other contractor or subcontractor who will receive, store, process, or transmit the CUI. So if there's even the hint that they're going to handle it, you're going to flow it down to it. There is, by the way, in 7012, an exception for commercial off-the-shelf products. The commercial off-the-shelf products do not require a CMMC certification. However, you'll notice I've underlined and highlighted generally, and that is generally true that COTS, commercial off-the-shelf products, do not require a CMMC assessment. So if you are if you've got a contract with Defense Logistics Agency and you're delivering 1 million rolls of toilet paper every month to, a DLA facility in Colorado Springs to be exact, the probability that that contract is under CMMC is pretty close to 0. However, if you're delivering 1 million rolls of toilet paper that require special packaging and watertight seals and must be labeled with Diego Garcia on them and stuff like that, at that point, you may actually, even though you're delivering a fairly benign product, commercial off-the-shelf product, you might be subject to some of the level 1 or level 2 requirements because of where you're shipping the item or how you're processing it or how it's packaged. So just because it's a COTS product, don't automatically assume that it's not subject to CMMC. You want to look for those clauses like I talked about and the DFARs, the 70, 12, 19, 20, 21, and 24. You want to look for those clauses. And if you have a toilet paper contract and it clearly calls out those clauses, you probably want to go back to your contracting officer and ask, okay, are these clauses there because this is standard and that's what you do for every contract? Or is there something about the delivery of this toilet paper that really does require a little bit more protection? So like I said, if you're shipping toilet paper to Diego Garcia, it could actually fall under FCI or CMMC or CUI because of how you're labeling it, packaging it, and how it's getting shipped there. I know it's kind of an extreme example, but it's the simplest one available. Okay, when do you need to be ready with CMMC? Well, short answer is that every federal contractor or subcontractor who has bid or received a DoD contract since January of 2018, you should have been compliant with CMMC or the NIST 171, and you should have been submitting your SPURS score, the Supplier Performance Risk System. You should have been submitting that every single year since 2018. Contractors were required to do self-attestation under the current rule, and there's no minimum score. 110 is desired for all contractors, and it may be a discriminator like we talked here. The SPURS score started to become a discriminator in March of 2023 with the inclusion of the DFARS Clause 7024, where the government said, okay, contracting officers, you now should be looking at the SPURS score to determine the risk that a contractor brings. Now I will give you some warning. If you've been submitting a 110 for years since 2018 and your score suddenly drops, you will red flag the system, because at that point the question is why did you go from 110 score to say 105 or 90 or 80? Right now, for most organizations that are doing self-attestation, aren't having a third-party assessment, be hard on yourself. Be brutally hard on yourself. It is always better to enter a low score of, say, 70, 80, even a minus 50 score is still acceptable to SPURS. You want to have a realistic score that if you get called out and they send in a third-party inspector to do a spot inspection of you, you're not going to get embarrassed by saying, hey, I'm 110, but the third party comes in or the DIBCAT comes in, says, no, you're not really a 110, you're more like a 50. That can be a very embarrassing situation, number one. Number two, that can actually lead to debarment of contracts. It can also be showing up in your contract performance reports, your CPARs. So you want to be very careful about what score you report. Contractors typically are required to implement CMMC and the NIST 800-171 controls by contract award. So you can bid a contract under the current rules. You can bid a contract with a plan to be CMMC compliant by the time the contract is awarded. But I'll tell you that it is a discriminator if your packet and another packet for a bid are very close in, technical, cost, performance, et cetera, schedule, all are about equal, but you say you won't have CMMC until, a year from now, but the other contractor has already got a CMMC and maybe even did a third-party assessment with under the Joint Surveillance Program. Their contract or their proposal has a slightly better chance of getting through the system than yours because the risk to the government has been lowered. And like I said before, since January of 2018, I cannot emphasize this enough. Since January of 2018, every contractor who handles DoD CUI information has had a requirement to be compliant with the NIST 800-171, conduct a self-assessment, and self-report. If you have not been doing that or your self-reports don't have meat behind them to substantiate it, you could be in trouble when the new rule is issued. Now, here's what the final rule that's going to come out, hopefully in 2024. We've been waiting with bated breath. Level 1 contractors will still continue to submit self-attestations for compliance prior to contract award. Level 2 contractors, on the other hand, must have a third-party assessment with a score of 110 prior to contract award in order for the contract to be awarded to them. They may have a plan of action and milestone or POAM for up to 180 days on select controls. So you may not have to go in with 110. You do have to come in with a minimum score under the POAM of 88, and you only have 180 days to close that gap. So if you have done your internal assessment and you're nowhere near 88 or near 110, and you think it's going to take you a year to get there, you will probably have problems when the new CMMC rule issues being compliant with the CMMC rule. Level 3 contractors, we talked about that. This is that subset who are handling very specialized information. Level 3 contractors and CMMC assessments are all the level 2 controls with 110, no POAM, and then they have an additional set of government inspections with, again, no non-conforming controls. So level 3 is a much higher standard for organizations to meet. There is no POAM, there is no time to get there. You either are there or you're not there.
Robert, we have a question from Eddie
Sure.
about how the recent Chevron case that the Supreme Court ruled on may or may not impact CMMC. This has been quite a hot topic among people that are following this issue.
Eddie, this has got the entire CMMC assessment and ecosystem upside down right now as to how the Chevron ruling and the I guess, weakening of agency requirements. We don't see any direct impact coming against it right now. However, I would be remiss in saying I don't see there'll be any impact. I think we will see some level of discussion or arbitration going on. And I think it'll probably be in the first year after the rule is issued, because essentially what's going to have to happen, from Robert McVeigh's humble opinion, I'm not an attorney, but from Robert McVeigh's humble opinion, I think what's going to have to happen is a contractor is going to have to push back, or a contractor is going to lose an award and is going to push back, file a grievance, and then file a lawsuit that says, hey, the CMMC is arduous, overbearing, et cetera, whatever their rationale for it is going to be. They'll have to do that before it'll get actually resolved and solved in the courts. But I'll say the short answer is probably for the first year or two, once the new CMMC rules comes out, it's going to be the law of the land. It's going to be what it is. And it'll take that first legal case or that first GAO protest to impact the rule. So yes, I think Chevron is going to have some impact. I would not play that game of chicken with the Department of Defense if you're trying to win a contract award in 2024, 25, or 26. You might find yourself on the losing end of that proposal. Okay, Eddie, I hope that addressed your question. If it didn't, circle back with another Q&A for us, and we'll try and close the loop. I'm going to switch over to how to implement CMMC. The first and foremost thing you got to do is determine, does your contract contain CUI? If your contract deliverables. If you could produce the product or you could produce the service or the capability the Department of Defense wants, and you don't need CUI. So if the contract deliverables don't require CMMC and CUI, then don't accept it. Tell the government, tell your contractor, hey, I can perform, I can deliver this product without you giving me CUI. That is the easiest answer. We tell our clients always, if you can do it without CUI, tell them you don't want it. Because if you don't have the CUI in your system and you don't have it by extension, then you don't have to comply with the CMMC rules. You have CI maybe, but you're not at that higher level. Especially if you are producing a product that is either, generally commercial product or close to a commercial product, go back and ask, do I actually have to have CUI? The other piece is that if say, nope, you have to have CUI, you want to limit and identify the minimum CUI and CMM needed to produce the product. No more CUI than is absolutely necessary. One of the greatest examples I have of this one is, let's say I do aluminum rivets to hold aircraft skin and materials together. As the contractor for that, I'm probably handling CUI because you're probably telling me you need a particular type of rivet of a particular diameter, particular length, whether it's a pop rivet, a screw rivet, a compression rivet, whatever it is, you're giving me that information. You're probably telling me that the rivet is to be unfinished aluminum so that it can ultimately go to one of the facilities to be spray painted with those really special paints that they put on, for aircraft to reduce radar cross-sectioning. So as a result, you're handling CUI. But do you need the plans to the F-35 to deliver the 35,000 rivets to make the aircraft? Probably not. So in this case, you tell the government, look, I just need you to give me the specification of the length and diameter of the different types of rivets. I'll deliver those because they do contain CUI, but I don't need the drawings. I don't need the plans. I don't need how they get installed on the aircraft if all I'm delivering is the rivet. So you really want to push back on getting just the bare minimum information you need to deliver your contract. Again, this goes back to the more information you have, the higher level of protection you have to provide to it. The other thing is once you start implementing it inside your system, you want to reduce the systems, the applications, the locations, the machines, and the people that handle or require CUI. If you have a 100-person CNC floor, you have, let's say 50 CNC machines, 100 people operating the floor, do all 50 machines and all 100 of those operators need to know the CUI? Or can you subset it and say, I'm going to do only the government CUI on these 10 machines, and it'll be these 12 or 15 people, nobody else. Again, what you're trying to do is limit the scope. What you don't want to do is you don't want the whole 50 machine floor and 100-person group to have to be inspected as part of your third-party assessment by the assessor. You really want it to be down to, okay, only these 12 people can handle CUI, only these 10 machines do it, it's in a closed room, it has only access to these people. That seems like it may be a little bit of a push for a company to get there, but what it does is it reduces the scope of your CMMC assessment, number one, and it reduces the probability of losing that information. Same thing, identify the people. The last piece is determine the most appropriate method for storing, processing, transmitting the CUI. Again, if you don't have to move the CUI around, if you don't have to send it across the internet, or you don't need to store it, the more things you can do to minimize the number of people, machines, networks, etc., that transmit, touch, or store the information, you probably want to lean into it. This is most apropos for organizations that have an ERP, an enterprise resource planning system. A lot of organizations put everything into the ERP, all the orders, all the data, all the information, all the delivery information, all the build to print, etc. All that goes into their ERP. So their attitude is everything's available to everybody in the ERP. Now, that's great for sharing of information and efficiency in the organization, but it may not be so great for your CUI, because by doing so, what you've now done is you've gone from those 10 machines, 12 people handling it to maybe, 500 people and 100 machines handling it. You just increase the scope of your CMMC assessment. Number one, that gets expensive fast. Number two, you've also increased the probability that somebody who shouldn't be handling that information, or somebody or a machine that shouldn't be doing the information, gets the information inadvertently. And so therefore you now have a spill on your hand of the controlled unclassified information. Um, I'm giving you a notional CMMC preparation timeline, and there's a reason I'm giving this here now, because in a minute we're going to be talking about the rule release and the timing for the rule. These are kind of the best practices. When it comes time for you to say, okay, you know what, we got to do CMMC, we want to bid on a contract, or we have a contract that's due. First and foremost, determine, back to what I said before, what CMMC is required. Review your contracts, request for proposals. This will typically take most organizations about 30 days to determine, do they have CUI, if CMMC is going to be required, where it's going to be required. The next step, once you've determined, yes, I have CUI, yes, I need a CMMC assessment, is then determine the scope and the use of the CUI. We just talked about that a minute ago. Where it is, who handles it, how it's handled, where it's processed, who has access, and what are the contractual requirements for the CUI. Again, this will probably take your organization between 30 and 60 days to track it all down, figure out what you really need, what you don't need. Once you've made the determination of, yes, you got the CUI, yes, these contracts require it, and oh, by the way, here's where it's going to be stored, here's who's going to use it, here's how it's going to be used, and who has access, then you start looking at implementing your compliance. Your choices are, you can build, you can migrate, or you can upgrade your environments. You've got three choices. You can do all your CMMC CUI in-house. You can put it on the cloud. That comes with some restrictions and some problems. Or you can do a hybrid. Any of the above. And again, there's not a specific that says all CUI and CMMC must be conducted in-house. No such rule. The requirement is that whatever method you choose to protect it, that you understand how to protect it and you protect it properly against the NIST 800-171 standard. So if you want to choose in-house, you think that's the best way to do it, good on you. If you want to do it cloud, just understand the risks and controls around cloud. If you want to do a hybrid, that's fine too. We're not restricting how you do it. The other piece is you're going through the implementation. Do you intend to use a managed service provider or cloud service provider? If you're using a managed service provider, when the new rule releases, your managed service provider must have a CMMC assessment to the same level that you do. If you're using a cloud service provider, your cloud service provider must have either a FedRAMP moderate authorization to operate or a FedRAMP moderate equivalent security controls around its organization. The other thing you want to do at about the time you start implementing your CMMC compliance, get a hold of your C3PAO that you intend to use. Largely because scheduling for C3PAOs right now is anywhere from 120 to about 180 days out, largely because we got to make sure you're ready for the assessment, number one, but more importantly, we got to get the right assessor ready for your organization. The building and implementing your CMMC compliance is anywhere from 6 months to 9 months. It is not a fast process. It can be fast, but in the adage of fast, cheap, and good, you can only pick two. So if you want to go fast and you want it good, it's not going to be cheap, and vice versa. So just plan on giving yourself 6 to 9 months to implement it. Once you've implemented the entity, you must conduct an internal review. The current rule that's going out is requiring us to be compliant with ISO 17020 inspection bodies. And so as a result, the organization must conduct an internal review. My recommendation, if you're going to conduct an internal review, is either have a CMMC professional or an assessor do that for you. They know the rules, they know the requirements. You could use an external assessor like a C3PAO to do your internal assessment. Just understand that if you have an external assessor do your internal assessment, they cannot be the assessor that will do your final certification. You got to pick a whole nother body. It's an expensive way to go, but it's usually a good way to make sure that your organization is going to be protected. Your internal review will probably take you about 30 days. Once you've completed your internal review, you must conduct a management review and a readiness determination. Short answer is you go to your management, you say, okay, we've done the internal assessment, we've mitigated or corrected the problems, and we're ready for the third-party assessor. The reason we recommend that internal review, the management review, and the ready determination is third-party assessments are not cheap. They're not unreasonable, but they're not cheap. They're like an ISO assessment. And once you conduct the assessment, there are only a certain number of controls that can be POAM'd or put off for the 180 days. But once you pay for the assessment, it's a done deal. If you fail the assessment and don't meet the requirement, you won't get the certificate. And if you go back and remediate it and it takes more than 180 days, you're going to have to pay for an entirely new assessment. So you want to be committed and make sure you're ready for it. Your management review all the way through scheduling your C3PAO, you're probably looking at another 30 to 60 days. And then the last piece is conduct the CMMC assessment. And in this arena, you're looking at the duration is driven by the number of employees, the number of sites and locations you operate, how many enclaves have CUI or CMMC in them, how many systems in those enclaves are handling CUI, CMMC, et cetera. And an assessment, I wish I could give you a number, but it can be anywhere from 5 days for a really small company, say 5 or 10 people with maybe 4 or 5 machines. Probably do that in about 5 days, all the way to 30 to 60 days. Again, large company, 1,000-person company, you're probably looking at an assessment closer to 30 days. The real rub to this one is that from the day the leadership of your organization says we need to be CMMC compliant to when you are actually really CMMC compliant is about a year. You can go faster. We've seen some companies do it, but it's really hard to go fast. In this arena, there's just so many nuances to the controls that you have to implement. The reason I raise that is the next one is we're going to talk about where CMMC is. I'm a little tight for time, so short answer is the CMMC we talked about. Right now, what we know is OIRA, or the Office of Information Regulatory Affairs, received the Department of Defense's final proposed rule on the 27th of June, just a couple weeks ago. We're anticipating that rule will be released in this calendar year, so that we have a final rule in place, hopefully by the end of December. Cyber AB is currently allowing organizations to get a NIST SP 800-171 conformance assessment as an in lieu of. It will require an upgrade to a certificate when the new rule is released. And like I said before, we're anticipating it for this year. We talked about this one. What has not changed, the requirement for you to be NIST 800-171 compliant if you're handling CUI has been there since January of 2018. It has not changed. Now, the reason I raised the issue about the 1 year to get there, here is the timeline for the proposed rule as it went to OIRA. And I'm just this pick and say, let's say OIRA releases it to Congress. Congress has 60 days to review the rule. And let's just, for argument's sake, say OIRA releases it on the 1st of October because they want this sitting Congress to review it and not push it to the next Congress, which forms just after the first week of January. So if the rule is released 1 October of 2024, phase 1, which is the level 2 self-assessments, starts the day the rule goes live. So if the rule goes to Congress on the 1st October, 60 days later, the rule, unless Congress says no, 60 days later, the rule becomes official. 1 December, the rule goes in. That triggers phase 1, which starts on 1 December, and then runs for 180 days. Phase 2 begins 180 days after 1 December, so 1 June of 2025, phase 2 goes in, and this is the requirement for select DoD solicitations and contracts to all have the new rule. And then phase 3 is a year later, so 1 June of 2026 is when all DoD solicitations and contracts have to have, so all options as well, all have to have the new DoD requirement. So short answer for anybody who's questioning, when will CMMC become mandatory for my organization? Well, it could go mandatory as early as 1 June of 2025, assuming the 1 October release, or it'll be 1 June of 2026. And that's why I brought up the rule. It takes about a year to get ready. So, here we are, July of 2024. If you happen to be one of the contracts that's selected for this, level 2, select solicitations, you have basically a year from now to be ready. If you're lucky enough not to be in this group and you're in the all DoD contract and option award, you've basically got 2 years to be fully DoD compliant. Now, everybody says, oh, I've got 2 years, a year to get ready, a year to get my assessment, I'm good. I would not put a lot of credence in that one. By the way, they just added a new C3PAO. C3PAOs are the only organizations that can issue certificates. As of, this was last week when I prepared the slides, I checked in last night, there's now a 54th C3PAO, but there's still only about 240 assessors. So this phase 3 could be as many as 30 or 40,000 contractors all needing CMMC assessments. It's not hard to do the math and say if there's even 10,000 contractors needing assessments and there's only 240 assessors and 54 C3PAOs, that's a hard push, market size to get there. And the DoD has not given a lot of latitude for this phase 3 slipping. So again, June of 2026 is not that far off in terms of what it's going to take for you to be ready for an inspection, as well as getting an inspector in there to do it. Phase 4 is for all the level 2s and level 3s. Not really worried about that because the level 3s is only about 3,000 or 4,000 contractors. I'm more concerned about the 70 or so thousand contractors that'll be in this phase 3, all of whom must be ready to go by June of 2026, assuming the rule releases this October. Any questions on the implementation or the timeline?
It looks like, Robert, we do have a question from, hang on one second, where did it go? I believe Eddie was wondering, the 240 assessors, does that mean that there are only 240 people who have the CAA or the CCA certification?
Correct. There's only 240 of them right now. I know we're anticipating that to grow. The problem is to create a CCA, they first have to have a CCA has to have at least 3 years of inspection background or auditing background. They have to have cybersecurity for, I think, 5 or 8 years. The big challenge to them, though, is that they got to go through the CCP program and get CCP trained and certified. Then they have to go through the CCA program, get trained and certified, and then they have to conduct 3 witness audits before they can be an assessor in their own right. So with only 240 of them, we're not anticipating this market is going to grow super fast. It will grow, but even if it were to grow, let's say it doubled in this year alone, that's still only about 500 or 600 assessors against 30 to 50,000 contracts. So it is going to be difficult if you wait until 2025 or 2026 to be ready for your CMMC assessment, don't have a coordination with the C3PAO and plan. That's going to be a hard press for you to find a C3PAO to do the assessment, because the C3PAOs are the only ones that can issue certificates. So even if you have an assessor, if the assessor is not affiliated with a C3PAO, they can't issue you the certificate. So it really comes down to the 54 C3PAOs. Forgot to add the new one last night. It comes down to those 54 organizations being able to handle the volume and process everybody. So they're going to have all their scheduling. Almost every one of these assessors is going to be working for a C3PAO. So it's really going to become a supply and demand problem very quickly.
Robert, we have kind of a related question. Let's see. There's interest in a link to the website listing the currently qualified individuals or firms that are C3PAOs. That would be cyberab.org.
Correct.
And this person also wants to know some of the steps involved in becoming a C3PAO. You can find those on the same website, but maybe you could just paint with some broad strokes, Robert.
Okay, so there are different types of people in this ecosystem. There's registered practitioners advanced, and registered practitioner organizations. All the registered practitioners, the RPs, the RPAs, and the organizations, they are the side of CMMC that is meant to do the consulting and prepping companies to get CMMC compliant. On the assessing side, there's 3 entities. There's a CCP, which is a CMMC certified professional who can work under a CCA, which is a CMMC certified assessor who can conduct an assessment. So a CCA can oversee several CCPs or other CCAs doing the assessment. The C3PAOs are the CMMC third-party assessment organizations. Their job is to bring the assessors together, have the assessors conduct the assessment, and then turn around and they go through the assessors. They do the quality review, they do the ECP reviews, they do the checks and balances to make sure that the assessors did properly do the assessment. And then the C3PAO has the leadership and then issues the certificate that says, company XYZ under assessor Bob Smith conducted an assessment and met the requirements in this 800-171, has a score of 110, no outstanding deficiencies. That's the certificate. To become a C3PAO, first off, you have to go through a background investigation by the Department of Defense. They have to determine, how your company is owned. Are you owned by, countries or governments that we don't necessarily want having information in their bailiwick, number one. Then you have to do the application fee. A C3PAO has to set up a fully CMMC compliant enclave, and then get inspected by the Defense Industrial Base Certification Assessment Group, DIBCAC. And then they go through an annual review of their ISO 17020 inspection body requirements and certification to make sure we have all the right processes and procedures in place to manage these assessors and manage these assessments. That's kind of the 35,000 foot level at high speed. But as Marjorie said, if you go to cyberab.org, click on ecosystem and look on the different roles, click on C3PAO, it'll tell you all the requirements to become a C3PAO in no detail, to include all the fees, all the structures, all the assessments for it. Any other questions?
Does not appear so right now.
Okay, so when you get this, or you want to take a screenshot, every statement that I used in this briefing came from one of these documents. The executive order issued in 2010, the Title 48 for the Code of Federal Regulations is here, as well as this is, by the way, this one here, I'll highlight this one. Oh, sorry about that. Go back. Can't highlight when I'm in full screen mode. This document training right here, this is, while it's dated 2020, this is a great primer on what is CUI, who can handle CUI, and the training behind CUI for the Department of Defense. This is great resource here. The DoD CUI.mil continues to get updated. They've paused the updates on that one until the final rule comes out, but it should be updated in very short order. If you have questions about what is CUI, you want to come here to archives.gov CUI. This goes back to the question about national identification number and my confusion between personal identification number and a part number or a product number. This is where you want to look as to what is CUI. And with that, we got about 5 minutes left. If you have any additional questions or you're interested in assessments, please reach out to myself, Robert McVeigh at Smithers, or Marjorie, my marketing specialist. She's the voice in the background. She's phenomenal at getting you information about CMMC and the other standards as well. You can also use the QR code here in the middle to actually directly book an appointment with one of us and jump right in and start asking us questions and get you back on the journey. We do a lot of basic guidance and discussions about what is CMMC, about what is cybersecurity, because it can be confusing at its best and difficult at its worst if you don't understand what you're driving into. And with that, Jake, I'll turn it back over to you. I think we are done.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Robert. And thank you once again to Smithers Information Security Services. And also a special thanks to our series sponsors, Amphenol CIT and Renishaw. And obviously a very special thank you to Robert for your time today and for your continued contributions to Defense and Munitions. So I hope you have a great day and looking forward to the next column as well.
Right. Thank you.
You can listen to all of our episodes of Manufacturing Matters and Lunch and Learn podcast from the MFG Radio Network on Spotify, Apple Music, and on our websites, todaysmedicaldevelopments.com, aerospacemanufacturinganddesign.com, defenseandmunitions.com, and evdesignandmanufacturing.com.